Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion. I am Sterling Henderson. I'm going to be the moderator this afternoon. This event is being hosted by the NGC Bocas Lit Fest on the occasion of the 30th anniversary of the events of 1990, the attempted coup d'etat, and in recognition as well of the recently published second edition of Dennis McComey's 1990, The Personal Account of a Journalist Under Siege. And this is going to be central to our discussion today as we rely on it very heavily. In my mind, we could, for exact reportage and ball by ball of the events that would have started perhaps just a little in about half an hour's time at about 6 o'clock on a Friday afternoon here in Port of Spain. But Dennis is joined by Adrian Pinero, a long-time friend of his, who will, he's the, hello, Adrian's coming to us from Canada, and he's the co-author of the book. He was not in Trinidad and Tobago at the time of the attempted coup, but of course, like most expatriates, the news horrified him. According to Adrian, at one level, Under Siege is Dennis's personal account of the events of July 27th to August 1st, 1990. But on another level, it is our story. All of the people, Trinidad and Tobago residents or not, who lived in TOT or elsewhere on this planet, all who were affected by the events of those days, whether or not they consciously aware of its unhappy influence of their life. And of course, Dennis McComey is no stranger to many of us in Trinidad and Tobago, having been on the airways before the coup and a prominent feature as a figure who would have survived the events of that day. He's worked in communications all his life, in addition to being a veteran broadcaster. He's the author of the book being launched today, which is the second edition of the 1990 Personal Account of a Journalist Under Siege. Originally published in 2010, he was recognized as the Express Person of the Year in 1990 and is a national awardee. He happened to be at work as a producer broadcast on Radio 610 when the attempted coup took place in 1990. And thus begins his story, in that it's quite a tale of how he did actually end up featuring so prominently, but we'll get to that a little later. We're broadcasting today from the Writers' Center in St. Clair, Port of Spain, home of the Bocas Lit Fest, and today's event will take place in two parts. In the first, much shorter segment, we'll focus on the book in question, the second edition of Dennis's book, and then we'll have a wider conversation to launch the new edition a little bit later on, and we'll have in studio, as it were, on screen, Diana Mahabe, Wyatt, Mohammed Wakil, and Andy Johnson joining us. But if I was to pose my first question to you, Adrian, in the introduction to the book, you draw a very strict parallel between Dennis and Imam Yassin Abu Bakr, two Belmont boys, foundations in Catholicism. I mean, different but parallel. And I wanted to know, why not pitch them as opposing characters? Why, in your introduction, did you prefer to show the similarities in that way between Dennis and the leader of this coup?
Well, I thought I did both. However, it was important to note the fact that they're both very strong believers in God, which is unusual today, especially for adult males over a certain age. Most people tend to be agnostics. However, they are both still, and were at the time, very strong believers in God. So their approach to the issue was, from my point of view, came from the same perspective, that God had somehow given them a direction. Oh, you've lost me. Well, sorry about that.
I think he made a statement, sir.
Sorry?
I think he's made a statement.
You feel he's made a statement? Well, unfortunately, I am not hearing you at this time, Adrian, but I don't know if you covered it in your answer just now, but is it that you are not erasing the fact that there could have been some sort of divine motivation on the part of the Imam in doing what he did?
That was certainly his claim. And, you know, we have to give him the benefit of the doubt. What struck me, and reading about the issues during that period, during that week, hearing conversations, talking to Dennis about it, hearing reactions of other people.
Are hearing him.
Oh, really? Hearing reactions from other people about what had taken place. The thing that struck me is that they were both anchored. They seemed to be anchored in the same way.
Yes, Adrian. We are
Did you hear any
sorting
about-
out. Say it
I
again.
see, okay.
Yeah, we're sorting out some technical issues on our side, but we'll have it all fixed in just 1 minute, I hope and imagine.
Okay.
Oh, I just heard him say okay.
But
Yeah.
yes, you did do a good job in terms of laying the groundwork for a story that is both familiar and different in a way, given, you know, even Dennis's connection to so many of the characters who would have featured along the way. But Dennis, you described it in your book as a Muslimine grab for power. Do you believe that there was some divine motivation, or do you think it was a naked grab for power?
From the Muslimin themselves?
Yes.
Well, I'm sure they were feeling that the divine providence had something to do with their motivation. I mean, everybody uses God as a general excuse to get their own willful, egotistical agendas sorted. So I'm sure he felt he was doing what God wanted him to do. I think he actually said that in the first few hours of his why is the Prime Minister under arrest? God did not want him to be there. God wanted him to be there instead, you know. So it's all editorializing to me. I really don't have an opinion about it, as I don't about many other things. I've tried to be objective in my reporting of this. I tried to be as journalistically appropriate as I could, because I knew people were going to accuse me of having a personal story and that not being the history. Well, if you want to help write the history, say your bit as well. I'm glad that I was able to do mine.
Have you read the recently published affidavit where the Imam does say a lot of why what happened?
No, and I'm not going to continue to punish myself after this 30-year persecution about anything that the Imam has to say, right or do. He has proven to all of us that he is, I don't know, I didn't want anybody to ask me this question, but he's a chameleon and an opportunist and a convicted terrorist.
A convicted terrorist.
Yes.
That's a phrase that's a phrase that has gotten some in trouble recently.
Well,
yeah?
you know, it can, and if they want, I have my lawyers too. And don't even try, because I have no money whatsoever. But he got away on a technicality, and that is not the point. The point is that on the 27th of July, 1990, he let 113 misguided Muslim zealots into the democratic parliament of the beautiful paradise that is Trinidad and Tobago. And we're still trying to come to grips with that horrendous event.
I think one thing that can't be ignored, though, and it is noted in your book, because the role of journalists, you know, traditionally is one that we cherish. And it was Tony Fraser, the journalist, who brought word of the amnesty that would have led to the technicality on which he got off. How valid was the amnesty in your mind?
Well, it was not valid because it was under duress, and if we know anything at all about law, international law I'm talking about, we will know that anything that was perpetrated on those poor victims during that time could not hold any water.
So that's your conclusion. I think the Privy Council would have found differently.
Well, the Privy Council let them go on a technicality because it took too long for all of the various appeals to be made to them. And they said that after we had let them go and then got them back, they were not going to go and let us get them back after 2.5 years or whatever. So don't ever say historically that they were freed They were never freed. They got away on a technicality, and that is a fact.
So what would bring in your mind closure, as the Imam suggested in his affidavit?
Closure for who, Mr. Bakr or myself? Or for Trinidad and Tobago? We have to talk about the kind of closure. I think we only heard him today say that he's not sorry. And there was somebody, a misguided victim, who heard something like that in an affidavit last week. And yet again, he's just turning around to suit himself. This week, he's vehemently denying that he ever said that and saying that he's not sorry because he didn't do anything wrong. Now, that is very interesting. I mean, how do other people feel about all of this? After 30 years of all of this, how do you feel, Trinidad and Tobago? The adults have gone through. We can do nothing at all about those dysfunctional people we call adults. We have to try and figure out what we are doing about the 30 and under, because those people in 15 or 20 years are going to be the ones who are standing in Parliament, if we still have one, to try and figure out how we're all going to live together without killing each other, because that's what we're doing now. We're killing each other now, we're killing the animals, we're poisoning the water.
Eating the scarlet ibis.
We're eating our scarlet ibis, the national
No
bird,
joke, no laughing matter.
We're getting away with murder,
Let me ask you.
treason, violence.
Yes, but there's a sense that this whole beginning of the beginning of life with impunity, or being able to do anything with impunity in Trinidad and Tobago, began with the coup. That is where that sense of people can do what they want and get away with it.
I think that was confirmed by the coup. It doesn't just happen overnight. This was a creeping cancer that is now inoperable. It started with Eric Williams, God bless his soul, who was given the God-given motivation to bring us out of colonialism into independence. But the day after that happens, nobody listened to his speech in democracy, and that's why I put it back in the book. Because his own minister, Mr. O'Halloran, and several others, Pravat, and we can go down the line, started to nip away at the integrity of our constitution. And now today, in 2020, this is what we have.
I want to focus on 1990. You asked two very important questions in the book. One, how had the Muslimin managed to put its hands on all the guns and ammunition?
Well, you answer that, because I am
Well,
not,
somebody
I
has
do
to
not
answer that.
Somebody, and not one person, a whole lot of people.
Where do you see those people existing?
Well, I mean, the intelligence was supposed to know
Yeah, because
about
you
that.
also say, how was it possible for the government and politicians to have been taken so completely by surprise by the insurgency?
Now tell me that too. How do you answer that? I can't answer all those questions. That's why I wrote the book.
Well, it seems as if Abu Bakr himself has become the whipping boy, while a lot of people are getting away with unanswered questions, perhaps?
Maybe, perhaps. I don't know. I don't know. What do you think, Andy?
He's not with us yet. We have Adrian. Adrian.
Listening to everything. What do you think, Adrian? I'm dying here. Help me. You know?
Well, no, that was not my intention.
Abu Bakr himself said, Imam Bakr said that the guns and ammunition were delivered in a Wassa truck, and they let through because, in spite of this,
all of them one time
built up. However, yes, well,
overtime.
This is the impression. This is the impression he gave, that it was on one Wassa truck. However, there are certain people who have told me that there had been a sweep of the compound on Mukarafa Road. And then curiously, a couple of days after, a US warship had anchored not far off from that compound. So that raises questions that need to be answered, and perhaps they might never be answered in our lifetime.
There was a talk at one point that it was from Libya, but then the book tells us that all the weapons found were American weapons. You know, but in the end, you do also pose the question, and perhaps, I don't know if you have different answers for this, but as we wrap up, you know, they came out not the heroes of war, not heroes. They walked out of TTT not as heroes. They went in as liberators, but they did not come out as heroes. What are they at this point? I mean, I think it's clear what you may have to
But
say.
listen to me, you need to go to the dictionary. I don't like using that word at all.
Which, liberator?
But no, terrorist. You earn the title.
Well, I mean, okay, so then are we going to say that was the birth of radical Islam in Trinidad?
Well, I would think so.
I mean, no, because you're going to have to go a little further. I mean, Che Guevara, terrorist?
Well,
Fidel Castro, terrorist?
yeah, we can have we have to have
No, but that's the question that's being asked. Are
we
these
have to have
people...
another conversation about that, because it's not in context at the moment. We're talking about our own little piece of turf here, which is much smaller than Cuba and didn't have the same circumstances. But you need to
The
know
intent
what
was the same in that
terrorist
the
means.
Jamaat believed they were acting in the right. They have made a moral argument for their actions.
Yeah, but and I'm sorry to call...
Not to defend,
I'm sorry
but
to go there again, but Islam, there are certain terrorists in the
You
Middle
keep saying
East. There are certain terrorists in the Middle East who are fighting their own brothers and are going into long-known archaeological, historical sites and pulling down everything because they want their brand of...
The new caliphate.
Exactly. So what are you telling me?
Well, I don't know that this was not so much an internal political issue
I don't
as opposed to an ideological, because there was no... Was there an intention to institute Sharia law? There's so many unanswered questions. But then it's...
Wait, I got to say this. Unless we get the answers from the people who perpetrated this violence on us themselves, we will always speculate.
Would there have been Sharia law, you think, at any point?
Well, if I was Abu Bakr and I took over and I got my way, I would have had Sharia law.
You think he had a plan to actually take over?
Don't ask me what I think. I'll ask him. He is the one who have to answer these questions.
You spoke
not
to him.
me.
You were there. You would have known.
I spoke to him on the phone, and I was absolutely astonished that he called me, and he called me to tell me to stop, to let TTT put back on the link, or we would find out. I took that opportunity to effectively communicate with the man so that he could stop the further abuse, but it didn't work. It continued for 5 more days. And we are still coming to terms with that.
He was in part responsible for that as well.
30 years later. I don't know what else I can say.
Well, you said that the army didn't stop shooting until a bomb was fired at them.
Well, I don't know what I said this. I don't even want to talk about that. Huh? I really want to talk about where we go from here. I want to say...
Well, we'll get to that part of the conversation. We have come to the end of part 1. Thank you very much, Adrian Pinero, who has joined us from Canada. I know you're going to stay with us. And in the second half, we're going to be bringing in senior journalist Andy Johnson.
We might get him to say something. Adrian, thank you for helping me with this book. The imps are still trying to stop it, would you believe? The book is not available until the 1st of August. But for your hard work, I thank you. God bless you. I love you. Say hello to Patty Ann Page, my individual patron. I love you all.
I have a question.
He has a question.
Is the book going to be in Ishmael Khan's shop? Or?
No, it's going to be at Nigel R. Khan booksellers nationwide when the universe allows it to happen. Start from the 1st of August or so.
Okay, and what is the cost? What's it going to? What's the cost of a book?
I think it's going to be about $300, which is nothing.
Well worth it, though. Well worth it.
Magnificent piece of work.
It is a well-written book. I tell you, every time you drifted away from the details of the coup, I was like, no, I want more coup. I want more coup.
No,
and then it comes, and then it comes.
You don't want more coup, partner.
No, in the book, in reading the book, I meant. No. What I meant in reading the book and telling your story, because you go off into your sister as a Catholic and the death of Anthony Pantin and a lot of other.
There's at least 1,000 people in Trinidad and Tobago who still are emotionally mature and intellectually credible. They can think.
Dennis.
So they are the ones who need to go and get those books on the 1st of August.
But we also have an election. We have an election that you didn't. You seem to have come out just in time for the election, because it's also addressed in the book. Briefly. Why would you have included the 2020 election in the book?
Well, because politics is everything in Trinidad and Tobago. Every night you're being overwhelmed by all of this rhetoric.
So what is it you wanted to say? What's the takeaway?
I wanted to say that for the first time in my life, I'm not voting for anybody except for my own God and myself. You understand? I am not going to choose from a lesser of two evils. I want to choose a government that is doing what it should do for the people of my country. So this year, I am abstaining, which is my right, because I don't want to dirty my finger for any political party.
But they both treated you badly,
party.
They both treated you badly, yeah?
In your preference.
All right, and that note, we
You're
say
not
stay tuned.
getting my vote.
We have more to come. Human rights activist Diana Mahaber Wyatt will be joining us, as well as artist and musician Mohammed Mawakil. I'm Sterling Henderson. Do stay tuned. We'll be right back.
We are asking everybody to remain calm. The revolutionary forces are commanded to control the streets. There shall be no looting.
It's reconstruction time in Trinidad, so put your shoulder to the wheel, my lad, move on, don't stop till you reach the top. You put a hand and I put a hand and we will see. For big and for small in no time at all, prosperity. There's no other way to do it. Show your patriotic spirit, unity. Somehow, if Trinidad ever needed you, it's now. Trinidadians, one and all, hear my plea, answer my call. The peace and happiness we had before was lost with everybody fighting war. Let's hope that done. So move on, upward, come on. You put a hand and I put a hand and we will see. In no time at all, for big and for small, prosperity. There's no other way to do it. Show your patriotic spirit, unity. Somehow, if Trinidad ever needed you, it's now. Political policy and political ties, and rebuild your country before the good name dies. If everyone will learn to play their part, that is enough to make a useful start. Soon we'll have had a better Trinidad. You put a hand and I put a hand and we will see. In no time at all, for big and for small, prosperity. There's no other way to do it. Show your patriotic spirit, unity. Somehow, if Trinidad ever needed you.
His father was an incident.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. We're back. And it's part 2 of today's event, our panel discussion, Remembering 1990, Why and How Should We? Welcome to those of you just joining us for this event by the NGC Bocas Lit Fest on this, the 30th anniversary of the 1990 attempted coup, where we're also presenting the newly published second edition of Dennis McCormick's 1990, The Personal Account of a Journalist Under Siege, a very compelling read. Even for someone who was alive in 1998, it was like, you know, eating food that you like. Let me take the opportunity to remind you that this is one of the many events that have been we've been doing here at Bocas Lit Fest in terms of hosting online events as part of this milestone 10th year of the National Literary Festival. And don't forget, you can look out for our total virtual festival 2020, and that takes place from September 18th to the 20th. And keep checking our website, bocaslitfest.com, and the social media channels for regular updates and information on all Bocas Lit Fest events planned now through the festival, right? So that's coming up in just about a month and a half or so. And joining us now, to my right, Andy Johnson is currently the head of news at Power 102 FM, as well as a columnist, contributor, and editorial writer in the Express newspaper. He has served as the CEO of the Government Information Services Limited, and before that was host of the TV6 Morning Edition program. He's also been editor of the Trinidad Guardian and was the founding president of the Media Association of Trinidad and Tobago, chief reporter, and then news editor at the Express. In addition to his local assignments, he's been deep experience covering myriad regional and international events, and is also a certified mediator. Along with many of his colleagues, he worked through extraordinary circumstances to cover the 1990 attempted coup. Diana Mahabir Wyatt, and perhaps I should have started there with the ladies first, forgive me, but Ms. Mahabir Wyatt is a human rights activist. She's currently the president of the Caribbean Center for Human Rights and served as an independent senator for 9 years, mainly dealing with industrial relations and social development legislation. She has headed the local ECA and the Caribbean Employers Confederation, and amongst her many other achievements and engagements, she founded the Trinidad and Tobago Coalition Against Domestic Violence, the Shelter for Battered Women and Children, and Childline. She's also served as commissioner of the Commission of Inquiry into the events surrounding the 1990 attempted coup d'etat. And finally, but by no means least, Mohammed Mawakil. Mohammed is the co-founder of Freetown Collective and the band's lead vocalist. He's an artist who describes his story as one of searching, where he was enrolled at UE to study civil engineering, but soon realized it wasn't for him, so he transitioned to theater arts of all things. Yeah, well, he says it didn't take him long to discover the freedom that comes with true self-expression. His journey led him to spoken word and then ultimately to music. Mohammed is the son of Salim Mawakil, a key figure in the 1990 attempted coup, and belongs to a younger generation of Muslims who grew up in the Mokarapo Road Jamaat pre-1990. So welcome to you all, and thank you for participating this afternoon. I would perhaps say to you, Andy, as a mediator, where did we go wrong in 1990 in terms of resolving it there and then?
Well, I don't know that it could have been resolved there and then. You know, these things are some milestones in a country's development. We've been almost there on many occasions. And while you were discussing with Dennis, I was thinking back some of our history before that. There was a time when a man named Tubal Buzz Butler was public enemy #1 in the country. The whole power structure was set against him. Now we have highways named after him. He's been honored in many different kinds of ways. You know, and there are other people like that. You know.
Was he as polarizing as the Imam?
At the time, certainly he was. You know, he said on a platform somewhere, the governor responsibility for Trinidad and Tobago at one time was a man named Sir Hubert Rance, and it was said that the governor wanted to see him in a situation in which there was contestation about electives for parliament at the time, elections, and he said, let Rance stay there, and Rance said, and this kind of person he was. And he came to supreme fame when a police officer who was revered highly in Port of Spain by the name of Charlie King was sent to a meeting in Hyderabad to find him and arrest him. And what happened is that Charlie King ended up being burned to death on the spot where you have the Butler statue.
Yeah, Charlie King Junction.
Yeah,
right, where Labor Day celebrations culminate every year.
Yeah, so
Take yourself back, 30 years, Andy. Where were you on the day of July 27th, 1990?
Well, I was at my desk in the Express, and I would have been in the Parliament, except that I was going to, the CARICOM summit that year was going to be in Jamaica, and it was the first year after a long period of time that we were going to get US dollars to travel out to Trinidad. And I just come back from the central bank to get my allocation, $600 US. I'll never forget it, to go to the CARICOM summit. And as I sat back down on my desk, I got a call from a reporter at the time named David Maynard. He was a sports reporter. He called and said, Mr. Johnson, the shooting, send somebody. And I said, where? He said, the shooting, send somebody. I said, where? And he said that the third time. And I calmed him down, and he said, by police headquarters. And Leonard Robertson was close by with me, and I told him, well, what I'd heard. And I just sprang up from my desk and headed to the Red House. Lennox Grant, in a discussion recently, he was talking with other people, and I just happened to be in the room, and we were talking about the journalist's impulse and instinct. And he said, at the moment when everybody was trying to get as far away from possible, Andy Johnson was trying to get to the Red House because that's where the action was. Yeah. And I got there and spent some time getting a sense of what had happened, by which time, to see that, the one of the images that stays with me is that two of the people who were in the Prime Minister's personal security details, special branch police officers, were let out in their underwear alone with their hands tied behind their backs. And they stood up in front of which is now the Defense Force headquarters. A group of people had gathered there, and I was there watching for the next move, and they began to talk about what had happened inside. And they were walked from there to our guest house at the top of Piccadilly Street and Park Street at the time, and got some clothes and went to camp out then. And in that walk, I got a good sense of what had happened inside.
From them?
Yeah.
Okay. Mrs. Mahabir Wyatt, welcome. Perhaps we could start at the same point with you, because we have Dennis's testimony of where he was and what he was doing, but I know you eventually would become a commissioner on the inquiry. But in 1990, what were you up to on that day?
Well, I was in the Senate at the time. Can you hear me?
Yes, vaguely, but as soft.
I was in the Senate.
As a senator? As a senator.
Yeah. When I saw the TV where Jones was standing with a gun to his head, my children also saw it, and they assumed, as we all did, that the supporters for the coup were much greater in number than they were, and they assumed that what they would do is come and round up everybody else who was a parliamentarian at the time, so that they could really take over. And there was a statement made by one of the members of the coup that we were all to be rounded up and taken to a specific hideout that had been organized by the Muslims. So when it happened, of course, like everybody else, I was watching on TV, but I learned an awful lot more about the details during the Commission of Inquiry. I just wanted to make a comment about the statement that was made earlier about Abu Bakr himself saying that he was sent by God. If he was, certainly the other members of his crew did not know that. We had Bilal Abdullah talk to us, we had Kaya Akiabua talk to us, we had Shabazz, of course, and Doris Balak talked to us, and not one of them mentioned any kind of divine mission that was behind the actions that were taking place. They talked about other things. They talked about corruption in the country. They talked about police corruption, which we are still hearing about. They talked about the trade in guns. They talked about the drug trade and what they saw as the breakdown of society, but they did not talk about God. Nobody did at that time. But what
Mohammed,
really
sorry, Ms. Mahabir Wyatt, Mohammed, perhaps you could lend some perspective in terms of the ideology of the Jamaat al-Muslimin. Could you at all, perhaps from speaking with your father even, shed some light on what could be a multiple of issues that would have contributed to the actions? We'll get back to you, Ms. Mahabir Wyatt, and the Commission, surely.
Before I even speak, I'd like everyone concerned to keep in mind that I was 6 years old when this happened.
6 years
So my
old.
views and everything that I understand or come to understand happened much later after the coup. At that time, I was unaware, to say the least. With that said, Sorry about the background. That's cars passing, which they would pass.
BIL.
Yeah. From speaking to varying members and from listening to different accounts, it became very clear to me that everything wasn't clear. It is much like Senator Wyatt is saying. I think almost every man went in with some kind of different intention. And only a few people, only a handful of people actually know what happened on that day and what was the real intention. I would lean on the side of what Mr. Makomi is saying in terms of it being a grab for power, but maybe not a grab for power within the instant, but a grab for power that would be known after. Because it was the only, and I put it in quotes, extreme quotes, it was the only successful Islamic revolution in the Western Hemisphere that occurred. Successful and Islamic being in quotes, right? And so it gave the architects, and again, even that I'm putting in quotes, it gave the architects, which seems to be architect right now, a certain level of power on the street and otherwise. That is really the most I can say with regards to intention and the role of religion in it. Because I'm not sure at all that religion had a heavy hand to play in it. There are too many unknowns. And I'm also not sure at all that the intention was to impose Sharia law.
You know, you talk about at the time the climate of the country. In Dennis's book, he mentions Soko and ongoing marches that would have been taking place during the time, and a sense that the place was really at a boiling point.
Teachers, nurses.
Yeah, so give us anyone their perspective on what would have preceded the coup that could have perhaps also influenced the coup, as I think Dennis was alluding to by mentioning David Abdullah's role in terms of motivating marches through the streets of Port of Spain at that time in opposition to the NAR government. And then we have today the Imam saying that the vindication for him is that the government was voted out, showing that they were unpopular, showing that they weren't wanted. He just took a preemptive step in terms of trying to get them out, but ultimately, and the irony is that he's now pointing to the electoral process as being the way it was achieved. But what are your thoughts on the prevailing climate, apart from the personal issues? You live on the Jamaat property. You could perhaps tell us what the occupation was like, Mohammed, what the police harassment was like, you know. But Ms. Mahabir Wyatt, as a senior statesperson in terms of political life, what was your view of the climate at the time?
Well, my view of that was really sustained by the evidence that came out during the commission, and that was that the Jamaat community was very angry because the police kept trying to take over their property, and they were harassing them all the time, and like anybody, they wanted to defend what their home was. And that came out from almost everybody that gave evidence. And I'm not talking just people from the Jamaat, but people from the government, people from various ministries, people who were responsible for property, for government property. The main issue seemed to be that there was a threat to people's home and livelihood. And I really believe, so far as the architect of what happened, the impression we got was that the main architect was Bilal Abdullah, who has, I don't know what's happened to him now. He seems to have disappeared. He was a computer expert, and he did get work after the thing was over.
He's
and
making
then
a lot of money in China at the moment.
It's China still? He's still in China?
Yeah, lots of money.
Who is this?
Yeah.
Bilal Abdullah.
Abdullah.
Bilal
Very,
Abdullah.
very bright man. Very bright man. He went to St. Mary's College with me. Yeah.
Oh my.
And he's Myroon Ali's brother. He's a Bradshaw, really, from Belmont. This Belmont is well famous, you know.
I do want to
Mohammed
address
comes
something,
from
though.
Belmont.
He wants to say something?
I want to address something, Sterling. Earlier, when Dennis was speaking, he spoke about paradise being interrupted, and the question immediately came to my mind because I heard recently as well when the protest happened recently, people using that same language, that people were interrupting paradise, and I really have to ask, whose paradise? Now, I am not in any way advocating for breaking the law, but the law is a social contract that we've all signed into. We obey laws because we form this society. And when the society, I don't want to say works in our favor, not that at all. But when those laws are seen to be just across the board and work to the mutual benefit of everyone, then we uphold that social contract indefinitely. But when we see those laws working in the favor of a few and not in the favor of others, we must ask, whose paradise is this? And so when you say paradise was interrupted, is it the paradise of those communities that were flooded with cocaine and drugs that are still flooded to this day with cocaine and drugs? Is that the paradise that's interrupted? Because it seems to still be going on. What exactly was the paradise that was interrupted? And is it that in our attempt to return to that paradise so quickly, we've silenced the question of 1990 and also 1970? And yes, we've named a highway after Butler, but we've not taught about Butler in the schools properly, or why he is who he is, why he was who he was.
So what Muhammad, would you say is the legacy of the Jamaat al-Muslimin?
The legacy of the Jamaat al-Muslimin, unfortunately, is not what it should be, in my opinion, because after the coup, when the Jamaat was reformed, and even before that, the Jamaat fed people on a regular basis. There was a clinic there, people could walk off the street and get medical treatment. There was a dormitory for displaced individuals. And because of the rift in the community, we've slowly seen that legacy kind of diminish. And power kind of relegated to the hands of a few, who in many ways haven't kept the exact same vision. But the legacy of it, though, and many may find this contentious and may disagree, because Dennis did also speak about a certain level of impunity for bad behavior being picked up after the coup. But the idea that within a democratic system, if that system is seen to really be out of favor with the people, that at some point someone can stand up and say, this is enough. And I'm not saying any way of taking over the government, but in general, I do think within the confines of the law, as much as is possible, it is the role of the patriot and the citizen to stand up and speak. And at times,
that is what we do. That is what civil society and human rights organizations do. We do it because we know that things are going wrong. Things are happening that are wrong, like even dealing with refugees and refugee children and sending them back. Although they are registered by the UN as refugees, we're still doing that. But we don't pick up guns and start shooting people.
No,
and
we
that
don't.
That is what a democracy does. You get civil society to go after it. And if you had I really resent the statement made by Abu Bakr that and you just made it, that the revolt was successful.
No, I put it in quotes. I put it in quotes, and I also put Islamic in quotes. I didn't.
Successful is successful if it's in quotes or not in quotes.
In my view, it wasn't successful.
No,
I wasn't saying that. Sorry, I have to clear it up because of how public this is. I have to clear it up because of how public this is. I was not saying that it was successful. Yeah. I was saying in a very specific light as to why it might be deemed successful by some.
But Abu Bakr said that, and because he said the government changed, but the government changed because there was still a democratic system and people voted them out.
Absolutely.
That, whether it works as well as we want it to, which I don't think it does, but it's still is non-violent, and he said I thought it was really important. Nobody else has implemented this except you. And that is the educational system which has failed generations. In fact, that if you ask young people, even teenagers, what they know about the 1970 attempted coup by the army, they've never heard of it. They don't know the names of Shah and Hussein. If you even ask them about 1990, they think that you're talking about a musical group. They don't know what happened in 1990. And if you don't know, the old saying that you're condemned to repeat, if you do not know what your history is, and I think it's really important. You don't know your history. Not the
Andy,
bad
what
parts.
is this issue of whether or not the coup was successful?
No, because I tell you, one is that the airport had been shut down for 3 days. This thing went on for 6 days. The airport was shut down for 3 days, and the day that the airport was open, a friend and I decided we will go and see what's happening at the airport. And it was coming around the time of emancipation, and Wole Soyinka, the great Nigerian writer, was here to participate in some event around that time. And he was heard among a group of people saying that this thing is a failure. They were negotiating then the amnesty which came out, and he was saying that when you attempt something like this is a Nigerian talking who they have daily experiences of these kinds of things. If you are 3 days into it and you're negotiating, this is a failure.
Yeah, but
Other than that, another point I wanted to make is that to me, I have come to terms with some of how I felt about Abu Bakr. Then I walked up to him in the Hall of Justice a couple of years ago and said, I had said I would never speak to you in life again, but I think I've grown in a certain kind of way, and we want to move on from there. And I shook his hand and we talked. He will never be my friend, but that is a kind of moving on. And also what I want to say, it is just one way station in a broader sense of how the country has been developed. Because in 1973, there was a group who had taken up arms against the state, coming out of 1990, called themselves the National Union of Freedom Fighters.
No.
They killed a police officer, Austin Sanka. Two of them, one of them my friend and former editor at Moko newspaper, Andy Thomas, and Kirkland Paul. And after 20-something years in prison, lawyers went to court and argued that they should be pardoned because they were idealistic youth at the time, upset about what was happening in the country then. So we had that as well, So you have to put some of those things and others into perspective, in a kind of perspective. And let me just say also that Jennifer Johnson, who was a minister in the government, the group of women who suffered that indignity in the parliament for 6 days. If you read Selby Wilson's account today in one of the newspapers, talking about how they were forced to do their numbers in the parliament at that time. And she came out saying that she was impressed with the kind of commitment that there were 14 and 16-year-olds who were involved in that part. And she was impressed with the level of their commitment to a cause that they believed in, and their sense of dedication to what they were doing, wondering how is it that they could have been so influenced on that side when the government was trying as hard as it could to bring people along with it. So you have all of that as part of this narrative as to what transpired.
In the historical context, you have to remember that you need to put attempted in front of a coup, because it was not a successful coup d'etat in any way.
Yeah.
What resulted from that event was 400 or 500 million, people are now using billion, damage, a psyche of a community, a communal trauma to a people, and its exponential consequences over 30 years. We have young people walking around angry and hungry and confused, and they don't know why they are walking around that way.
It's part of our development.
Because there's no effective communication among the peoples of this country.
100 years from now,
we are all
seeing
trying to express ourselves, but nobody is listening, and nobody is sending back feedback to say that they've received the same message that the sender is trying to send.
What I want to ask Mohammed is, what is the allure of the Jamaat al-Muslimin? It became a violent radical group by reputation, but I'm sure that it was more than that. And to see the number of young people who were willing to, I don't want to say blindly follow, because those are the kind of comments we're getting here, you know, people saying things like blind patriotism will get us nowhere. If peaceful protests won't bring about change, what are the masses to do about systematic injustice? There's someone who perhaps could justify taking up arms against the state. But in your mind, what was attractive to young people about the Jamaat al-Muslimin? If not, if you can't tell us about at that time, perhaps tell us in essence.
What has always been attractive to young people about groups that go against the status quo that isn't working for them? It's not a question of the Jamaat specifically. It's also a question of Rasta City. It's a question of Muslim. It's a question of all of the organizations that we see that are happening now, where young people are flocking towards it. Very recently, 30 policemen were held regarding human trafficking in Trinidad, and we've seen this as a consistent thing. I can tell you from right where I sit here right now, 5 houses from me, there is a man who is consistent bringing girls, right? We see them come. It's been reported, nothing's been done. 2 houses from him, there's a policeman. 5 blocks from that is the police station, and 3 blocks from the police station is a crack house that this entire neighborhood knows about. And so when young people see that happening, what faith do they have left in the system? And then along comes a group, any group, Jamaat al-Muslimin, be whoever it is that says, we're going to put a stop to these things. You've been complaining to the police, you've been whatever, you have it in your heart to enact justice, come, we will give you the strength to do that. And in many ways, whether it be by law or it be outside of the law, and most of the time, obviously, if the law isn't upholding it, these young people are going to take the chance to go outside of it. It's the same as though many young people see in the education system failing them, and you know, someone going to UE and coming back home and not being able to support their family, and then somebody else coming and saying to them, hey, if you take this bag of whatever from here to there, I'll give you $2,000. If you hold this gun from me, I'll give you $1,000. You know what I mean? And when the month comes, that young person who's never been to school can earn something $10,000, $15,000 just like that.
Wow.
What do you think?
Mrs. Mahabir, I want to ask you, in terms of the Commission of Inquiry, did you look at the relationship between the coup and crime today? Is that one of the issues that was covered by the Commission?
Oh yes, very much so. The report, if you can see, this is the report that the Commission of Inquiry drew up. And a lot of it had to do with corruption in the police service, with lack of training, with also in customs, which we know about. The same thing that Muhammad was talking about existed then and still exists now. And nothing has been done about it. We have made at least 15 or 20 recommendations, including compensation for those who are injured, which have none of those recommendations arising out of the inquiry, which went on for almost 2 years has been taken up until pandemic. What was recommended, number 1, was medical system. The medical system is in a mess. There was no plan in the medical system. There were only 6 or 8 doctors and somebody's dog wants to get in a conversation.
Is the dog true?
All are welcome.
There were 12 nurses and 6 or 8 doctors in the whole of Port of Spain General Hospital when they had something like 100 people come in to be dealt with. Nothing happened to improve the medical service until the pandemic. The second thing, as we all know, that was really a scandal was the judicial system. That people were charged and incarcerated for 10, 15 years before their cases were heard.
Yes.
But now, with the pandemic crisis, so cases are being heard online and it's speeding up. It's wonderful. And I want to add one thing to what Muhammad has said that people don't know, that there are a number of young people that I know whose lives were saved by the Jamaat. My grandson has a friend whom I have met, a lovely young man who was abandoned as a child, and he lived at the Jamaat, went to school from the Jamaat, he went to St. Mary's College, And he eventually got a scholarship and went to Stanford. He was granted scholarships to 3 different universities, the best universities in the United States. He would not have got there had it not been for the generosity and the kindness of the Jamaat. So the Jamaat, before it got into this, whatever you want to call it, coup taking over the world, genuinely did help a lot of people who otherwise would not have gone. And I think that should be recorded. It's part of our history that nobody knows about. It's not taught in schools, along with the history of 1970, the history of 1990.
I remember at one point.
Consensus on that history first, though. You know, I mean, Andy, I want to not lose the point about the relationship between the coup and crime today. And I want to know, as a journalist, how do you, if you will, imagine that as a truth to bring us to where we are?
Well, I am still trying, I've been trying to wrap my head around it. Maybe my sense of making that kind of connection is just not what it should be. But I read what people say about it. I don't know. The question is, there's this search for answers and you know, to connect the dots and all these things. In a lot of cases, I struggle with seeing how it came about. What I have an issue with, or what I notice as well, is the extent to which, remember in 2000 and in the early 2000s when Mr. Manning was Prime Minister, and he attempted to, because he'd said that there were a lot of things outstanding from 1990 to that point, and he attempted to deal with it by allocating some more land to Abu Bakr that had been held in abeyance up until that point. And he made an announcement one day, and then the next day he was in the paper rescinding that, and standing behind him were a number of his senior men, including the current Prime Minister, so that they had opposed it. And in 2020, the current Prime Minister is holding functions at the diplomatic center at which Abu Bakr is a guest. So that is what part of the fascination.
But should he be a pariah forever?
Let me just add
Well, that's
to
what I'm
that.
saying.
Let me just add to that.
And so it is.
Please, Andy, let me just add to that. I know I'm just butting in here, but I think it's my prerogative as well. We have to understand that in only recent weeks, the Jamaat al-Muslimin, or the organization, if I'm getting it correctly, has been given $300,000 as part of the faith-based organization's outreach for COVID-19.
Right.
Since then, there was really good news too, that they were helping them with their school and their medicine, whatever else. We are all citizens of this country.
Right.
The Muslimin and their children are all, this is why it makes it so complex, this is why it's so difficult, this is why, to be able to get to the resolution, we have to acknowledge what we've experienced, seek the truth in this matter, and heal. But unless the components are there, none of this will happen.
Well, I'm not sure what is meant by healing, because a lot of
Well,
cases.
I know what is meant by healing, because I have been through a lot of pain in the last 30 years, and I would really like to heal.
Yeah, well, plenty of us. But,
so the
there's a
next thing we
question.
have to ask is, what are the components or the criteria for this? This is a question that the national community has to address if we have to go into what we are now calling, and I put it in whatever you call it, a new normal. Is it going to be a rehash of the old normal with all the corruption and all of the discrimination and everything else?
We'll get back to that, Dennis, because there is always this question of, can it happen again? And when Mohammed sits there and talk about the fermenting crime situation with Muslims and Rastas, and the failing health system still, and education problems, we wonder, do we as well still have the elements for a coup? But I am challenged to be interactive, because the discussion here is so compelling that we could forget we have an online audience who we'd like to participate as well with. So one person is asking, do you think if this happened in another country, the perpetrators would be walking around freely? Mohammed, perhaps you might answer that.
People ask these questions as though you can just transplant these things.
Yeah.
If this happened in another, listen, this could not happen. Not this. We can't transplant things like that. We look for these easy fixes by saying, if this happened somewhere else, this wouldn't happen. Look, forget that. What happened here? you know. And I also want to just quickly talk about the asking for truth. I don't think that any truth is going to come out of this until a certain generation has passed. That's the truth, because there are too many people with too much to lose. But
I agree with you there, Mo.
Yeah, and how with the new generation, where will they find the truth?
It's about what we do and when we do it and what we should do. Where's the politics in all of this? Why are right-thinking politicians on either side deciding to make the right choices about this very pressing trauma that is impacting the national community and has for so long?
Mr. Johnson, just to say,
which is what?
Which is what? The
well,
trauma.
they could start with the recommendations. Why didn't they implement it?
Okay. Someone is saying a question for the panelists.
Administration is no longer a good idea.
I just wanted to be clear on what you were talking about, though, Dennis. But Abby Ria is asking, since the coup, what have we implemented as a country to address the root drivers of poverty, corruption, crime, and inequity that seem to have been some of the factors that led to the coup in 1990?
In a short word,
what have we done?
Many projects and initiatives were started out of that. You know,
but
this makes
with what results?
Well, that's the question. With what results? But attempts had been made. Governments between 1990 and now have tried all kinds of youth empowerment programs. That is one of the things that white them. Just think about it. Names like that to find alternatives to young people in different forms. You know.
But those have, in my opinion, only been programs that have been aimed at plugging people back into the same systems.
Right.
There haven't been any any kind of radical program towards actual economic autonomy for young people to actually stand up.
Well, so we could argue that, but if you ask what has been done, there is a whole smorgasbord of things that have been done.
I want to pose this one from one of our online participants to you directly, Diana. But can we teach about the history? Wait, where did it go? She's asking. Oh wow, it seems to have disappeared. She's saying basically, can we teach about the history if we don't agree upon it? Or if it's not possible to get to the truth of what happened?
Oh, there we go. A very, very good question.
There's no one truth.
Yeah.
Okay, let me answer by saying this.
Argument about it.
If you know that in Trinidad and Tobago there was a concentration camp in which German Jews were kept during the Second World War.
Yep. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
My great uncle.
Mucuraco. I sat and talked to, there were several, we had a lot of Germans here. I mean, like the Stallmeyers and Sketchers and so on, people who had lived here for a long time, established, worked, and their families were born here. They were put into a concentration camp during the Second World War. I talked to Hans Sketcher, and he was a schoolboy. He was about 10, he must have been about 12, because he was going to St. Mary's College at the time. His family were German Jews. They escaped Nazis in Germany and concentration camps there to come to Trinidad. We put in a concentration camp here.
Wow.
And this is our history. And if we are asking about should we know about our history or should we not, I can tell you all kinds of things about our history that people don't know. Look at the look on Mo's face. Absolutely astounded.
Are they heroes of war? Are they failed insurrectionists? Or is the contribution of the Jamaat al-Muslimin beyond the events of 1990? I know that they recently got recognized as one of the non-denominational schools, and or one of the denominational schools, and they, as you have mentioned, have created some great. Muhammad went to Jamaat school, went to QRC, is a CIC, successful musician, you know, poet, writer. You're a product of the Jamaat, you know, Muhammad, in some ways.
I'm a product of my grandparents and some of that.
You're a product of?
I'm a product of my grandparents, my parents, and a lot of people put work into this here. But I will say this, since we know that one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist, the way that we, in my opinion, are going to move forward from this is that a generation is going to have to realize, in order to birth civilization, there will be pain. And you may not always get to the bottom of what you deem to be the truth, the nitty-gritty of it. But if you can look at the situation in its entirety and say, these things must happen, they must happen. Are we going to continue to harp on them in a certain type of way, or are we going to go into them understanding that they must happen, find as much truth and reconciliation as we can, and then forge our way forward? You know,
maybe we do grow up, but the financing of the school, the Jamaat school, was recommended by the Commission of Inquiry.
There you go.
The rationalization of the land problem was recommended by the Commission of Inquiry. The improvement of the medical system was recommended by the Commission of Inquiry. The upgrading of the police in terms of qualifications to enter and the police training was recommended by the Commission of Inquiry. And it has taken 7 years before anything happened. And
Is
why
the report public?
Yes, of course.
The report is public.
It's public. It's public.
Dennis, did you testify at the commission?
I was very honored to do that.
Did you pay for your legal representation?
Pay?
You had legal representation?
No, I can't afford stuff like that. I just
I did, but
represent
you did.
myself.
But I mean,
You did?
there were lawyers. I testified, but there were lawyers there who were helping you. You know, as an invitee.
You had to write a statement before you even called to tell them what you wanted to tell them, and then when they approved that, you had to go on and
There was a sense that
ask questions.
there was an adversarial tone in terms of the Commission of Inquiry, that what should have been held was a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that would not lead to civil or criminal charges or indictable statements and stuff like that, and that the way in which it was treated, because there are people who were involved who did not testify.
Right.
I know some people who didn't.
Not because they weren't asked to do that.
No, but some said they didn't want to pay for their own legal advice because they were being asked to do that.
They didn't have to do that either.
We did not have to have legal advice or legal representation.
Exactly.
Some people were so frightened to speak in front of a commission that they opted to do that, but nobody was asked to do it, and nobody was forced to do it. And I agree with truth.
Sorry, a lot of people thought it was a waste of time, and I was extremely happy that some effort was being made in whatever manner to try to come to terms with that experience. So I commend you, Commissioner, and I am very happy to this date that we did that. It's the only thing that has happened to bring any kind of information, closure, any kind of resolution to this situation. It was a national inquiry, and the efforts made over 2 years by the commissioners to make it a professional inquiry with integrity. And I commend you for that.
Yeah. No, I'm saying that the idea of seeking closure, that is not going to happen. It is an event that has happened, and as part of our history, we learn from it, and we go forward.
Yeah, but
you know,
what have we learned from it?
There's no one thing that we will all come away from it with. It is a step along the way of the development of the society.
There are many things we could come away with, we can find some consensus on. How are you feeling 30 years later? Are you happy it happened, or are you not happy it happened?
People are still coming to terms with the legacies of slavery 400 years ago.
We have to get
and indentureship
national consensus on things.
Yeah. It's fine to be feel that way, but let's hear what Andy has to say.
I'm listening to you as well, but I'm adding to make the discussion.
But the audience is not going to hear either of you if you both chose.
You understand? And this business about these things have to happen. We have to make good choices. They don't have to happen. If we make good choices every time in the interest of humanity.
And who is to determine what choices are good?
Yeah, because I mean the Imam has sort of
have the discussions and decide, continue the conversation.
Yeah,
you understand?
Yeah,
but do it.
The discussion.
Don't let it fester for 30 years and still follow your agenda because you're empowered by unknown and unseen individuals.
The discussion about slavery and indentureship and what is called indigenous assaults and so on are still taking place, and there's no resolution to that. You're reading stuff now about what happened 150 years ago. You know, that people are writing about it now.
I mean, like, people are pulling down statues that have been up for 400 years.
So what are we going to do after we pull down the statue? How are we going to make our life better? We did not turn the statue into keychains or anything and give it to the poor black people, you know. We put it in the water and then went to another demonstration. Where are we going from here?
Mohammed? I'd like to know your views.
Time to build a civilization. A civilization is not built over 50-something years. It's not built over 100 years. So when you say where we're going from here, we are going forward, regardless of if we like how we're going forward or we not or we don't. It doesn't take 50-something years to build a civilization. And if we begin, not just in Trinidad, but as a Caribbean, to think in terms of civilization building, which is what we should be thinking about. And I'm not saying to dismiss these issues as small. But if every time, and it might sound weird to some people, but if every time we have instances like this, we get stuck and we say, we have to see the truth of this, and we stay here. It's like lighting a candle to see in the dark, and then staring at the candle while you walk. You're going to bump into things. You have to do two things simultaneously. And so getting stuck on these things is I don't know. I'm not saying to dismiss it. I'm saying we have to be so magnanimously minded that we begin to see further than we are now.
And we have to
address it.
And we have to recognize it, because slavery is going on in Trinidad today. It costs $300 US to buy a 15-year-old Venezuelan sex slave.
Yes.
And nobody is talking about this.
Oh, my water. Sorry about that.
That was what Muhammad was speaking to in his neighborhood a little while ago. And it seems almost as if it's a losing battle in Trinidad and Tobago when, you know, we can sit here and all discuss something as real as human trafficking or modern day slavery and still not feel as if we have a means at which it can be or will be addressed. And I don't necessarily want to get stuck there, but I would like to shed some light or perhaps ask about compensation, ask about treatment of victims, ask about how singular the focus has been in terms of those not only involved but affected by the coup. Do you think that there has been a proper treatment of, even Wendell Eversley, you know, not taken that seriously, but very committed to his efforts to ensure that July 27, 1990 does not just become a 9-day wonder in our minds as things tend to in Trinidad and Tobago. Would you say that the greatest achievement so far has been the Commission of Inquiry?
Can you give me 3 minutes? In terms of compensation, there are people who were physically damaged, have never been compensated. There are people who have been emotionally shattered and are still getting therapy who have never been compensated. There are people who were at Radio Trinidad who were wounded and never been compensated. And although it was a government station, hear me well, and the government was the employer, they did get 2 months compassionate leave, and immediately afterwards they were retrenched. Why were they retrenched? Because the board of directors decided that there were going to be more stations coming on, there would be competition, and therefore they needed to cut back staff so that they would not lose money. That is the compensation that they got. And the people who are on the board of directors are still very prominent people in Trinidad.
Yeah.
And I'm saying that the more we see circumstances like this, the more young people observe that justice is not being done on a certain level, but it's being sought so in such a kind of fiery manner on another level. The more we see that, is the more we're going to see these type of aberrations occur in our society.
So are you predicting another coup, Mohammed?
Please don't try to sensationalize
Exactly.
this already.
How dare you do that, Sterling?
That is exactly what he just said.
No, it's not what I just
That's
said.
exactly what he just said.
They don't have to be inciters, you know.
We can't.
They can be holistic, but he's trying to get everybody upset with everybody else.
I can speak for myself, Dennis. You don't have to say what I'm trying to do. I can speak for myself. Thanks.
Yes.
Yeah, but Mohammed, that is a legitimate question, because even in the affidavit filed by the Imam a couple of weeks ago, he says that in outlining the environment in 1990, he sort of suggests that these police killings that we're seeing today and the sort of lawlessness and corruption that we're seeing today are again the ingredients that can lead to another aberration, as you put it.
Yeah, but still, the coup was something that was organized. It wasn't a mass uprising. Unfortunately, what we may see again, if we don't treat with these things properly, is a completely disorganized mass uprising. We were lucky in a way that the uprising last time was organized, because if it just takes root, we saw what happened with the protests. One community started protesting, and then all of a sudden we have businesses in Port of Spain right now who have boarded up their storefronts. First Citizens Bank, Royal Bank, it looking like if it's carnival. This is a real serious thing, because people have a sense that there's a large sense of injustice. So if we're talking coup again, I don't think so at all. But unless we address these things at some point in our future, there will come people who will basically say, okay, I think I've had enough of this.
It's not unique to us. Yeah, I see the commissioner of police saying today that something like this wouldn't happen under his watch. I mean, what is he talking about?
He said he will implement his one-shot, one-kill policy. And they expand. What upset you about that?
For some people, the conditions continue to exist in some people's minds, and who knows
the injustices.
Yes, and who knows what some people are thinking even as we speak here, how to resolve it if they feel that you can't do it, walking the straight and narrow.
That flare-up a couple of weeks ago is a signal of how civil unrest could look in Trinidad and Tobago in the 21st century, because we had a network of things that, as they said, were trying to shut down the country. And it could have been successful, perhaps, if it was a little bigger. Yeah? We have some comments here. Makeda Thomas says, thank you, Mohammed. Thank you, Mohammed. The Dennis McCormick rant with supporting actors. Okay, that's a nice one.
Thank you, Mohammed. Thank you, Mohammed. This discrimination. Is it because he's nicer looking than me, or what?
He has more friends on Facebook. That might be it.
Oh, I don't have a Facebook. Maybe
That's what it is. One person says, what I've learned from the coup attempt is that we are conditioned to ignore the voices of the perpetrators. Sometimes their reasons have had a lot of truth so deep, it might as well overthrow the government. But Andy, in terms of because we are Bocas Lit Fest and we are here to launch a book, in terms of the other writings, Dennis's is a very personal retelling of a front row view of what else is out there in terms of the writing on the coup.
There's Raoul Pantin's Among the Believers,
yes,
which he was talking about those days at the hands of Abu Bakr and that rank, and there were others at the Red House. So there's that, and there are these two that these are parts of my collection. And this one by Professor Ryan was published in 1991, just months after it, right? The Muslimin grab for power, that's where that term came from. And then this is Professor Ramesh Dusar and A Society Under Siege. And what I want to say about them is that to a great extent, what is in between these both sets of covers here, it's drawing on the extensive reporting that had been done in the months leading up to what happened and the months after, so that the work of journalists could be found in these covers here as to how they took those things and made interpretations as to what happened.
Yes.
I know you began writing your memoirs. Any intention to do anything specific to our history or so?
Well, of course, it will be the history of me as a reporter, and I spent most of that time in Trinidad. I take out the time that I spent in Toronto, but it's interesting you ask that, because for people who, when I talk about my biography and work and so on, I say for me, my biggest story in 48 years of journalism this year was the collapse of the government in Grenada. And
Under Maurice Bishop?
Yeah, more than yeah, for a number of reasons.
Interesting.
I remember
Dennis,
actually talking to Bernard Cord on the telephone.
You told
from
me, yes,
the
yes.
control of 610, and I you know, emotional and just speaking my heart, I begged him not to interfere any further with the other people, and he didn't keep his promise. He killed them right afterwards.
we have 10 minutes to go, and I want to know, you know, I'll start with you, Ms. Mahabir Wyatt, and ask the direct question. Dennis obviously still has to come to peace with it, I think, and he'll get a chance to say his own part.
No, I come to peace with it. I'm just being entertaining because I don't want to come across as a boring person tonight.
Never.
First time I've done a virtual, whatever you'd like to call it, and I do not understand what's happening up to now. And it's my only opportunity to chat with you guys. I've been under quarantine since December. I'm in that category, you know, I don't want to catch COVID.
But Ms. Mahabir Wyatt, how do you remember 1990, personally and post-Commission of Inquiry?
Well, to start with, Dennis, you've never been boring in your life. So forget that.
Right.
At the time, I remember very distinctly the week before the 26th, looking at TV and seeing in another country taxis and laughing and saying, can you just imagine taxis in the street? That could never happen. And not very much longer after that, I was just as traumatized as everybody else. I just did not believe that this could ever happen in Canada. And which meant that I was pretty blind about a lot of things too. Although I have been working for years with people who are abused and battered and mistreated, as a lot of women and children in this country are. And I lived on the seamy side of life, and I still did not believe that kind of action would ever happen. I was very glad I was part of the Commission of Inquiry because I learned an awful lot from it. I think I'm a born cynic anyway, but that made me even more cynical. And I don't think that I will ever stop distrusting or doubting any political statement that is made by anybody. I feel that it's very important that we have to judge for ourselves. We have to decide whether we believe what we believe. I have no bad feelings about the Commission of Inquiry or the coup. That's in my past. I am very much looking to see now what are we going to be doing going forward. And I think we have a lot of work to do.
Yes, yes.
The question is being asked online, what does justice being done look like if they believe justice has not yet been done? And I'm being asked to ask the panelists this. Is this a situation that still requires justice? An attorney said to me this week, what do? Hang a man after 30 years? What is justice at this point for any of us? Perhaps for you, Andy?
For me, it would be making good on the recommendations of the Commission of Inquiry to pay some kind of compensation to the victims or to the survivors of the victims to address some of the trauma that they have gone through. That is a start for me. Yeah.
That the Commission not be a waste in that regard. Yeah. And that the for you, Mohammed, I mean, justice?
I've been listening to Mrs. Mahabir Wyatt, and you know the Commission has clearly made some really good statements fixing the healthcare system. I mean, that's so broad and so beautiful to say. The police themselves, have they gone through any sort of post-traumatic stress therapy? Have they been, because they had an entire police force go through this, you know, how did they interact with the people afterwards? Has that been spoken of? Do they need help? Do they need some kind of assistance? Justice is, if you have a Commission of Inquiry, then follow what they said. They obviously are going to give you justice in some form, and that's clear, you know.
But you see, I feel the Commission of Inquiry, and this matter is sub judice, so I would tread carefully, but the appearance of the lead perpetrator of the coup some people feel as if the commission, in not achieving that, really in itself was not so successful. Like not getting Abu Bakr to appear.
Well, he said he would, and then he changed his mind, and then he said he would again, and then he changed his mind again. Just like he said he was sorry last week, and now he's no longer sorry. So it's the same person, just 30 years later, you know.
Yeah, but I think it was much more than him.
Also be very clear.
You know what I'd like you all to do? You want me to say something?
One of the ways to move forward, I believe, is the Abu Bakr centrism.
Yes.
It needs to dissipate. There were a lot of other people involved. And to continue revisiting power and giving power to a single individual for something that he himself didn't mastermind and didn't perpetrate on his own, that's something to look at as well. Because I do think that we are also in many ways being used by the powers that be in order to continue feeding power in a certain place so that power can then be used in other ways.
But he identified as the leader.
Yes.
That is the exact truth. And if you ask me what my view of justice is exactly the same as
so as we wrap up, sorry? Oh no, go ahead. I'm looking at the time and I'm trying to make sure that we have that the camera doesn't cut on us, and we actually, Dennis in his book, and it is because of this book that we're here today, Dennis said they were terrorists who had been beaten at their own game and forced to surrender to the army that took instructions from the government that remained in power.
Yeah.
A failed coup.
Well, I think the most important thing to remember as we close here is that we are all citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, and we have loves in need of love today.
Is it still paradise?
Send yours in right away. Don't call it paradise, say innocence lost in 1990 if you want to. But the beautiful Trinidad and Tobago that we knew, in spite of all of its problems with drugs and violence and discrimination, is not the same. It is worse 30 years later. And we have to revisit our heritage, which is our culture, our education, our environment. We have to start respecting each other, loving each other, and acknowledging without denial what we have experienced.
But you can't put all of that at the feet of the attempted coup.
Will you be able to move on to whatever you envision a holistic future will be?
We may need to be doing those things, but you can't put all the blame for that.
But right now we're thinking about who we're going to vote for next week.
But what I'm thinking about is that what I want to leave you with is that, which is the I would say the fascinating part of Trinidad and Tobago, the confusingly fascinating society that we have, is that the attempted coup happened on a Friday. The state of emergency for 24 hours, and then it came down to 18 hours. And the next Friday, members of the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force, there was a pub opposite the Oval called the Cricket Wicket. Mm-hmm. Members of the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force had to be asking people, please, to let the vehicles pass, because people descended there and were having a time 1 week after this thing. And the other thing that stays with me is that I tell you, it is deadly to be under. I had a bus with a curfew pass, right? Mm-hmm. People who had that because of being a reporter on the ground and so on. And I was on the road at times when it was just me and the police. And it is a dreadful thing to be on the road with nobody else but the police.
Right.
That's one of the things I can
real life situations. Thank you, Mohammed. How do you, when did you judge the coup? Do you judge the coup?
I'd like to keep going back to the idea of the experiment of civilization. I think that's what if we keep our mind on it. So we're here at a table, and younger persons are coming to the table, and we're trying to decide exactly what it is we're building. But if every time someone stands up and we don't agree with what they say in terms of what we've decided to build, we throw them under the table, well, that person is going to stay there and get strung on the strap, and they're going to live in another place, So we have to start listening to the dissident voices.
Okay, interesting. Ms. Mahabir Wyatt, if you have one last thing to say.
I think that listening is the most important skill that any human being can manage. And it's one that very few people, we're not taught ourselves.
Yeah.
We're taught to speak, we're taught to write, we're taught to read, we're not taught to listen. And I know from experience in the business community and in social work that listening is something like 50 or 60% of the success rate of whatever you do. The more you learn to listen, the greater your success rate will be.
Thank you very much. A very profound note to end on. Thank you to all our panelists this afternoon. Humanitarian, human rights activist Diana Mahabir Wyatt, musician, artist, and activist in his own right, Muhammad Mawakil, senior journalist and man about town, Andy Johnson, and our very own one and only, one of a kind, oh my God, Dennis McComey, you know, the whole Dennis McComey. All right, I'm Sterling Henderson, thanking you, encouraging you as well to get the book. It's available at Nigel Arcan on August 1st. And of course, stay in tune to bocuslitfest.com, and you can join us again later on in September for the virtual festival from the 18th to the 20th, right? So thank you for being with us. Thanks to all your comments on Facebook. I know you're saying we need a part 2. We'll see what happens. But thank you all very much, right? And do have a good and blessed and safe evening.
You too.